In our podcast, Hearing the Unheard Stories of Transformation, we discuss a variety of sensitive subjects such as suicide, suicidal ideation, self harm, abuse, and faith crisis. Viewer discretion is advised. Hi, welcome to our podcast, Hearing the Unheard Stories of Transformation, presented by Pause Wellness. I'm your host, Eric Stoffer, and I'm happy to welcome our guest today, Jill Dickey. Hi, Jill.
Hello, brother Eric.
How are you?
I'm doing great. And hello, listeners.
Yeah, hello, listeners. Hope you've all had a good week. Last week, we had the opportunity to talk about curiosity. And this week, we're going to dive into the next stage of that. I believe it's self compassion. Is that right, Jill?
Yeah, we're going to talk about self-compassion because this is a favorite topic of mine because of how important I think it is. And this is going to be a part of the series that we're doing, the very long, but I think is great series on differentiation.
The
And
differentiation discourse.
yeah, it's a long one. So, you can all go all the way back and listen to the whole series. I think it's worth it if you haven't done that. But one of the skills that we want to develop to become a more evolved, more differentiated person, especially in our relationships, is tolerating discomfort for growth. And so this three-part series is picking that apart. We're going to talk about three things, three concepts, three ideas, three ways of being that can help us tolerate more discomfort for growth. Just as cliche as I can be, I'm just going to talk about, what creates a pearl. What is it?
You know, pressure,
Yeah,
time.
you have to get the little irritating piece
Hmm.
of sand inside the oyster, right? And because that's irritating and uncomfortable for the oyster, it starts to put protective things around it and it creates this beautiful gem. And so it's such an instructive way to think about discomfort is necessary for growth. And when we can learn to tolerate it in a meaningful way, then we can growth can become something we experience. And so I'm talking about different things that I think personally help me and hopefully others to be better at tolerating that discomfort for their eventual growth. Because
Awesome.
differentiation is all about maturity and development and growth.
And we are mature individuals here.
Yes, sir, we are. At least we're working
We,
hard to become
we're
more
getting
mature.
there
Right? We're, as I always say, in process. Okay.
in process,
Eric, but
pending.
before we start, we're going to talk a little bit more about that discomfort idea because I think there's a interesting um, phenomenon that I think if people understand, it helps them a little more. Okay, I want you to imagine three concentric circles. In the
Okay.
middle is safety. I just want you to imagine what it feels like when you're just feeling all safe and warm and nothing's threatening you. Nothing's difficult. You're just in that safe haven, hanging out, lounging around, enjoying the safety, the experience of safety in your body and in your nervous system and between you and others. Okay. The next circle around that is challenge. This, when we're in challenge, we're struggling a little bit. There's a little bit of discomfort. We're being challenged and it's not as comfortable in our body and it's not as comfortable between each other. Right? And then we've got the bigger circle. I think that's how it is. Yeah. It's
Chaos.
it's overwhelm and chaos. Yeah.
Yeah.
When our limbic system is fired up, we are in fight or flight. We are crumbling. We're falling apart, and nothing is really sound or working. And we're in overwhelm. What most people might feel like is overwhelm. And so, what we know about human beings around growth and learning is that when we're in that outside circle in overwhelm, we're not learning anything because we're just trying to survive. We're in a survival mode. And so we're not really connecting, we're not really learning, we're not really growing. It's too much overwhelm. When we're inside the challenge circle, though, where we're feeling discomfort and it's a little bit challenging, but our nervous system isn't completely overwhelmed, that's where growth happens. That's where learning happens. But most of us want to stay in that little circle in the middle, in the center. I mean, I like it there. It's comfortable there. But what I know is I'm not learning a lot. I'm not developing. I'm not maturing when I'm in that safety circle. It's when I'm out in that middle circle of challenge that I'm growing and developing. So, what we're talking about here is ways that when we're in that circle of challenge, right, we can implement some of these skills or ways of being or qualities that are part of the true self that can help us weather that challenge and make that expansion. What's that quote you said in our last session that I'd never heard?
No, no growth in the comfort zone and no comfort in the growth zone.
There you go. There you go. I've never heard that. I don't know why, but it's a good one. And that's kind of what I'm talking about. Okay. So we don't want to be out in that overwhelm. And when we're there, we need to figure out how to work with that. And then we want to get back into that challenge center when we're trying to grow. Any
So
comments on that before we move on?
well, when you use that quote in your therapy, I would like royalties, please.
Okay.
So
Okay. So did you, I mean, who wrote it? Who was the originator?
we're not going to talk about that.
You're just going to
It
take
doesn't
credit?
it doesn't matter who it was, but I would like
I
royalties. So
don't even know who it was, do you?
yeah,
Okay.
actually, I heard it in general conference. So
Oh, really?
yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, whoever said it was saying something wise.
So
Okay.
then it's priestcraft if I'm charging money for it. So
Yes. Okay. So one of the kind of catchphrases that I use a lot with myself and with clients is this idea of moving toward. When I'm feeling discomfort in whatever ways that is, and you can go back to our previous episode and kind of understand what we're talking about when we're saying discomfort, right? One of the things that I think to myself is I need to move toward the uncomfortable internal or interpersonal experience, move toward and figure it out with curiosity instead of that knee-jerk instinct to move away. And so again, if we want to move more toward and get better understanding, curiosity can help. And curiosity often leads to self-compassion, which is what we're going to talk about today. Not just self-compassion, but I want to also add compassion towards others that we might be in conflict with or in struggle with. So the reason I want to talk about self-compassion, really do a whole episode on this, is because there tends to be a cringe factor when I bring up the topic of self-compassion with my clients or with other
why?
people. Well, I was going to ask you, why do you think that's true? Because I remember you kind of talking about this in a
Well,
previous episode. I don't remember which one, but just kind of how people
yeah.
struggle with this idea of self-compassion. Why do you think they do?
Well, I think it's a couple of things. I think in Latter-day Saint culture, there was for our non-Latter-day Saint listeners, there was a famous talk given among Latter-day Saints by a prophet in the 1980s named Ezra Taft Benson, and the talk was called "Beware of Pride."
Mm,
And that talk was very, very good, but it also created a hypersensitivity to things that we may self-define as pride, but may not be necessarily what that prophet was talking about in that talk. And so that talk gained a lot of traction. And I think what has ended up happening is we have really meshed what is selfishness from self-love and
mm,
self-compassion.
mm,
And so we've had a tendency to err too much on the side of avoiding pride, that it has included avoiding self-love and self-compassion.
mm.
Now, I'm not saying that only Latter-day Saints make that same error, but I would say that's just from my own personal observation, that's kind of a history on where that has happened, at least for me and among people probably
Other
in
people
my,
you've talked to?
yep,
Yeah.
yep, people that I've
So they've
interacted.
conflated
Yep,
self-compassion with pride.
that's right. Conflated is the right word for that.
Okay.
And so, and I think that other leaders have tried to clarify that, and they've tried to say that's not what that was trying to say.
Hmm.
And in fact, one of my favorite things is one of the leaders taught recently that in Matthew, when it's talking about the two great commandments, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, might, mind, and strength. And the second is like unto it, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. This leader, Gifford Nilsson, he's the one who taught Elder Gifford Nilsson. He taught that I hear a third implied commandment in the phrase "as thyself,"
Hmm.
meaning as well as.
Hmm.
So we love others with all our heart, might, mind, and strength, as well as ourselves. For me, I always interpreted that to mean love others because obviously we all love ourselves
Obviously. Yeah.
anyway. So
Hmm.
you might as well love your neighbor as well as yourself, or like the way you love yourself. Well, if that were true, the way I love my neighbor would not be very good. because I'm not good at loving myself.
I love that you're saying that, and I want to talk more about that because I think that can really help us understand this. So, Eric, thanks a lot for that because I want to add that I want to start our list with that idea of pride and that
Yeah.
there's something that's going to lead to some sort of um not non-goodness or non-righteousness if we
Selfishness.
apply selfishness, pride, if we apply self-compassion and self-love to ourselves. So that's on the list. Can I give you more things that
Yeah, please
I
do.
think come up for people when we talk about self-compassion? A lot of people push off this idea of self-compassion as being really helpful for tolerating discomfort because they feel like their problems are small compared to other people's problems.
Mhm.
It's like I shouldn't give myself much grace because, or compassion or kindness around this because it's a small problem compared to what other people are dealing with. Okay. Another one on the list is people worry that if they give themselves that self-love and self-compassion, that they'll
They'll
just be
inhale.
reduced to a little ball of sorrow and suffering and self-pity, and they won't come out of that.
Mm.
Do I hear that?
So
I just,
so that means they must see people like that as weak.
yeah, maybe their judgment of someone else who does
Mhm.
that might be telling them something. Okay. Listeners, just be thinking about if any of this resonates with you when you think about the idea of giving yourself grace, giving yourself compassion. Just see if these come up for you. Another one, they believe, and this kind of goes along with what you're saying a little bit, but they believe that self-compassion is indulgent. And if they're
Yeah.
self-compassionate, they'll just sit around and watch Netflix and eat chocolate bonbons and they won't do anything.
Yeah. This is I call it the participation trophy culture,
Yeah.
right? Like there's a school of people who just they hate the participation trophy idea because we're just turning everybody into non-workers who are going to live off welfare their entire lives and not learn the a work ethic.
Yes. Well, and this one goes along with that, just right there is if I'm compassionate rather than critical of myself, I'll lose my edge and become complacent. Mhm. They kind of feel like punishment. I need the punishment. I need a good kick in the butt, you know, or else I won't make any changes.
Yeah.
And I'll kind of lose my
I
competitive
need
edge.
I need
Yeah.
self-punishment to get
Yep.
ahead.
Yep.
So if I give myself self-compassion, I'm losing what I need
I'll lose my
to grow.
traction.
Mm,
Yes. And my ability to
I do
compete.
that. I think I
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah. So watch that one. Um, a lot of times people just feel like they aren't worthy of the compassion.
Mhm.
You know, some of
Which
us
is
can
I
be,
think that's a derivative of the last one that you used,
yeah, it
that
could
you
be.
mentioned.
It could be.
Yeah.
People are keenly aware of the mistakes they make, some more than others, right? Just very sensitive to the mistakes they make. And they think that, that self-shaming is going to keep them from making mistakes. If they just kind of stay in that self-punishment and that self-shame, they won't make those mistakes that will then separate them from being good or being loved by God or being loved by others. And if they self-shame, then they won't make those mistakes again.
Yeah.
We talked about that, I think, in our podcast on perfectionism.
Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, yeah. To punish oneself is to prevent
Yeah. It's like
relapse.
insurance that you won't make
Yep.
those mistakes again.
It's the
Yeah.
power behind forsaking, so to speak,
Yeah,
which I think is
exactly.
false.
I think it
That's
is
not
too.
the power behind forsaking.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think you're right. And the last one I thought of is we worry that other things will get kicked up emotionally. This one's a little bit different, so maybe people haven't thought of this one, but we'll worry that other things will get kicked up emotionally if we stir the pot with a stick of self-compassion. For instance, when we don't even go there, Eric. Inside joke, we will not share on this podcast.
Okay.
Okay. So for instance, if we're worried that things will get kicked up, if we use self-compassion, these emotional things, for instance, like we'll remember that we haven't been treated in an acceptable way. Like maybe if we've experienced abuse or something, if we give
Yeah.
ourselves compassion, we might feel more pain around how we've been treated. And we're trying to keep that pain at bay. I know this
Oh,
is more
really?
deep, but yeah, this is what people really struggle with around self-compassion. Is if I go there, I'll be swamped with the pain that I've been feeling when somebody else has mistreated me.
Wait. I need to understand this a little bit better.
Hmm.
So something that you would think to someone in pain would provide comfort,
Hmm.
the comfort will trigger the pain.
Yes, in psychological terms, they call this backdraft. That when you go in and deal with a certain issue that you've been, struggling with, it might open the doors to other issues that maybe you didn't know were there, or you couldn't,
I've
you weren't
buried it
aware
well
that you were going
enough.
to experience. Yes.
I've
And
buried
maybe
it well enough, and I'm coping just fine
yeah,
without having to
you
go
kind
there.
of
So I
had
don't
this
want to
like
go there.
strength that's kind of kept pain at bay. And if you are soft on that, it might flood you and you won't be able to handle it. So, and
Okay.
that's very real. So I want to be really compassionate about that. Compassionate.
Well,
There's
I'm
right.
glad I asked that question because I that makes sense to me now.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's great.
Yep. And the other thing that kind of comes along with that is some of the backdraft is that we'll experience ourselves or aspects of ourselves that we're trying not to see or experience. And so if we give too much love and compassion, it might cause some of that to happen. It's called backdraft.
Okay. Backdraft.
So that's a little bit different, but I wanted to put it on the list. But let's go back to this idea of like punishment and, berating the self and shaming the self and not softening that up with any self-love or compassion. A lot of times, but punishment, if we're kind of hard on ourselves, punishment will kind of get us off the bench and into the game sometimes. But
Mhm.
I don't think it will see us through to the end of the game. I think we need compassionate, kind, encouraging coaching if we're going to make it to the end of this really difficult game that we call humanity and life. I think it's really tough. And so, you know, some people
Can
would
I
say,
can I say
go
something
ahead.
on that, Joe,
Yeah,
real quick before you go on?
yeah.
I watched that. Did you watch that documentary on Michael Jordan uh and his pursuit of success?
Yeah,
And
I actually think I did. It was a while ago, so I'm not going to remember it
yeah, it
really
was
well, but
it came out during COVID, I think.
oh,
But
yep, I do remember watching that.
it's like an 8 part documentary. It's
It
fascinating.
was good.
And the thing that I thought was really fascinating was the psychological study that it was showing about Michael Jordan. I mean, no
Hmm.
offense to Michael Jordan. You can school me on the basketball court for sure. But his pursuit of excellence was so over what anyone else was willing to do. It you and they interviewed so many of his teammates. It was like, at what cost?
Hmm.
At what cost did he feel like he needed to achieve that excellence? And he did. He was able to because he was willing to do it at all those costs of what
Hmm.
it took to get there. Now, why did I bring that up? What were you mentioning? Just
I'm
repeat
actually
what you were
trying to follow
mentioning.
your train of thought, and I'm like, okay, where's he going with this?
No,
So I was
what were
just
you saying
talking
right
about
before that?
punishment. I was talking about self-punishment, maybe getting you off the
Oh,
bench and into the game, but not all
yeah.
the way to the end.
It was off the bench and into the game. It's like, so someone who might be looking at that, they might go, okay, yeah, I get that. You need a coach who's going to be intense and who's going to expect this of you. So if we had a Michael Jordan mindset impressed upon us or pushed upon us, then we can be Michael Jordans. Well, that's not the case.
Oh, I
Michael
see what you're saying.
wasn't
Okay.
it wasn't Michael Jordan's coaches who did it. It was Michael Jordan himself who did it.
Yeah.
And so we probably wouldn't all feel good about someone treating us that way.
No.
Um, so we do need. Well, I think I'm agreeing with you. I know it was a really long
I
tangent,
was
but
like, where is he going? But I caught up with you. I caught up.
I agree with you. I think kindness and goodness and positive reinforcement. It doesn't mean there's not expectation or consequences for our choices to get better, but but you can catch more flies with honey than you can with vinegar.
Yeah, there you go. You really can. It's very true. And the other thing that I hear people kind of push back with self-compassion is that, I can give myself compassion, but it doesn't really solve my problem. And I think in a way that's true, but discomfort is inherent in solving big problems. And it will help us tolerate the discomfort in a way that will help us find space to solve the problem.
Yeah, maybe solving the problem isn't always what we thought it would be.
Exactly.
Maybe it's maybe the self-compassion causes us to reframe how we
Hmm.
see the problem.
Hmm. Okay, Eric, I like to bring in research. And the good thing about this is there's a lot of research on self-compassion. In fact, there are over 7,000 well-constructed studies on self-compassion. And it turns out, here's the big news, drum roll, It's good for you.
It's
Da,
what?
da, da, da. It's good for you.
It's good for you.
It's good for you. Can we talk about what it creates and see if we can convince people to move towards this a little bit more?
So you mean all those ways of thinking you just listed are not accurate?
Not accurate, it turns out. So here's what the research does show about people who report high in self-compassion on the scales that they give them in these research um, experiments and stuff. In other words, these people have developed the ability to extend to themselves the compassion that they would give other people. They've been able to bring it here into them. Okay. So I love this list. I love this list. This is so fun to read. So let's go through it. And I'll just go kind of through it and then you can comment at the end.
Okay.
Okay. They have deeper levels of perspective about what they are going through, and they are able to see themselves as part of humanity in a connecting sort of a way. Hmm. They tend to ruminate less than others, like negatively ruminate less than other people do.
Yeah, rumination. I saw a podcast or read something on that recently where ruminations when we get fixated on a
A
thing
thought
and
and
then
it
it
just goes and replays like a
spirals and
broken
gets
record.
worse and
Yep.
worse.
Yep.
Okay. So
And we
less
tend to
rumination.
ruminate on negative things. And so people who are high in self-compassion tend to ruminate less often about negative things.
Mm.
The next one, they take better care of themselves. People who are high in self-compassion take better care of themselves. They go to the doctor more often. They exercise and eat right. They have better boundaries in relationships. They're self-protective in healthy ways. It's pretty good.
Mm.
Next, this is so interesting. So listeners, pay attention because this correlates with what we were just talking about. They have just as high of standards as anyone else, but they have higher motivation and deeper purpose when they move towards those standards. It turns out that kindness, self-appreciation, and self-respect are bigger motivators for change. Okay.
So let's back up on that. So you can achieve things without self-compassion, but not with the same power.
That's what I think it's saying.
Yeah.
You do better at keeping high standards in your life and achieving things if self-compassion is higher in you. All right, next, self-compassion, and this is huge, reduces shame. The experience of shame drives so many unhelpful behaviors from perfectionism to anger to addiction. I mean, who doesn't want to reduce their experience of shame? It's such a difficult emotion to experience, a difficult thing. And self-compassion
Yeah.
can, when people are higher in self-compassion and they learn that skill and they're willing to give themselves that compassion, their shame reduces, their experience of shame reduces.
I think shame is the cancer of the soul,
It's so difficult. And we all
and
experience it. It's very human to
everyone
experience it.
does.
And we really want to know how to work with that shame. Well, one of the ways is to bring self-compassion to you.
Awesome.
Okay. And to
And the
others. When
research
we give
shows that.
compassion to others, their shame reduces as well. Okay. Next. Self-compassion cultivates a kinder inner voice, which reduces harsh self-criticism. It can shift our physical state from a threat state, meaning fight, flight, or freeze, which we talk a lot about here. These states are filled with adrenaline and cortisol. And when you bring in self-compassion, your threat state starts to dissipate and you start to move into a care state where oxytocin and good endorphins are released. So that's literally the physical impact self-compassion can have on you. It can
So that
increase,
can even bring on more curiosity because of
yeah,
that.
yep.
Hey,
It increases
I have to take you.
go
No,
ahead.
sorry.
It increases your level of oxytocin, which is also the endorphin or the chemical that goes through your brain that creates connection with other people and with yourself. So we
Improves your
want more
relationship.
oxytocin. It's good for us. Okay, what were you
Hey,
going to say?
I have to take you back because what you just said, I think it was two of the items before.
Which
You
one?
said as you show self-compassion to others, it also
It reduces their shame too.
okay. So Here's what's interesting. So, so does the research show that you can show compassion to others and reduce their shame without them having self-compassion? You get what I'm asking?
It might, actually don't know. That's a good question. I would guess that it would increase their self-compassion or their ability to their maybe just their openness to be willing to give some compassion to themselves because they're receiving it from others. Of course, I don't know the exact mechanism. That's just me
Sure.
thinking it
Just
through.
hypothetical.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
Okay. And then the last one that I have on the list that is research based is there's more people who have a higher level of self-compassion are more willing to admit mistakes and more willing to risk failure or cope with failure. And they're more able to reach goals because of this. And when we're talking about relational health, which is what differentiation is all about, right? The ability to be able to admit mistakes and see where you are not yet, to look at that shadow self is paramount. So if that is a goal that you have to increase your level of maturity, your level of development and your differentiation level, self-compassion helps you do that. And I think all of these things point towards helping people to tolerate the discomfort that's inherent in growth, to help you manage being in that circle of challenge and maybe even help you get out of that overwhelm that can bring you into challenge, which is where growth happens.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Another good package deal.
It's so good. I mean, yeah. And I know this is all good. I'm sharing these lists because I want to help motivate you to mindfully think about this and work to develop this ability because there's so many benefits to this. So many benefits to this. So one way to think about compassion is um, mindfulness with a lot of warmth. Okay, so blessing, grace, a gift. Okay, you think about it, Eric. Let's do it this way. Think about when you feel compassionate towards someone else. What do you feel like? What can you describe that? Is that too hard to describe?
No, I think I can. I, to me, it boils down to, I mean, compassion in the form of empathy is I've had that pain before. I know how bad it is. And I may not even know who you are. And the humanity in me wants to do something to help relieve you of that pain because I don't want anyone to feel the pain that I felt.
Hmm.
So, uh, this is something that is, I think it's really driven in me. I know we're going to talk about values in the next podcast, but it's number one on my list
I noticed that.
is, and I think it comes from pain. Like I don't think I can have compassion if I haven't had pain.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, not that I'm
Yep.
seeking out pain,
Isn't that the irony?
but that's the education of
Hmm.
compassion is pain.
Hmm.
Is I've been there and I don't want I mean, I'm sure you can get to compassion through sympathy, not knowing what it's like and just
You
imagining
can
how
because there's
bad
some
something is.
universal, yeah, like, yeah.
Right. There's pain that is not the same pain, but I've been through pain, and so you have compassion that way. But man, when it's empathy, it's it's like it's such a pure human emotion
Hmm.
because I mean, it breaks down every diverse barrier. It doesn't matter what race, religion, gender, sexual identity, whatever. Compassion is compassion,
Hmm.
and
Empathy,
pain is pain.
compassion. Hmm. So the challenge is I do think people tend to have an easier time extending it to other people,
Yep.
right? But when it's about extending it to yourself, people just have, and we've talked about why they have these barriers. But the idea is, can we give that same empathy, that same mindful gift of grace and blessing and kindness and and curiosity and love to ourselves when we're going through something really hard. I mean, we're part of humanity, right?
Well, this has just came to me as you were saying that is I wonder if the child in us just wishes someone would do that for us.
Of
You-
course.
Like you, I don't know, like you know the pain you want relieved in yourself,
Hmm.
and you know you probably know you can extend it to yourself.
Maybe.
But it would be really nice if someone that you love would do that for you. And so it's almost like you just want others to be able to do that. Not that sounds selfish or something, but
No, it doesn't. I think that's actually ideal. If you can get that compassion from people around you, and you can get that deep connection that comes when someone extends compassion to you. I mean, I hope you have a lot of that, and I hope you extend a lot of that to other people because it's powerful to
yeah.
receive that kind of grace and compassion from another person. And
Yeah.
so I'm not excluding how powerful that is. I just wonder if we can build that same skill to be able to have those similar feelings towards the self when compassion from others isn't
Well,
readily available.
yeah, and I think the problem with what I just said about it'd be nice if someone else did is that's a breeding ground for enmeshment.
Well,
It can cause you to be dependent upon
yeah.
others doing that for you and you not being willing to do your own work.
Maybe if you don't have the skill to do it yourself, I mean, but I don't know. That's a hard one because I think compassion when it's real, when it's powerful, it's extended very naturally and organically.
Sure.
Yeah, it's not forced like
Yeah.
sometimes a mesh caretaking can be.
But
Mhm.
if we're avoiding self-compassion
Mhm.
because we want others to do it for us,
Mhm.
that's enmeshed thinking, from what I
Maybe.
understand.
Yeah. Yeah. And and holding that reality maybe with the empathy and for the difficulty of giving self-compassion because of all the reasons we've talked about.
Yeah.
Hmm. So we're going to break. I want to kind of talk about two kinds of self-compassion because I think that
Okay.
can help people kind of understand what is needed. So there's two kinds of self-compassion. The first one is tender self-compassion. And that's the idea of being with ourselves in a tender and loving way, much like we would be with a friend that we care about. And oftentimes, when I'm sitting with a client that's really struggling with that self-compassion and it's so foreign to them and they're really having a hard time connecting to it, it's not always because they don't want to give it to themselves. It really is a hard feeling to try to even find. One of the ways that I can help them find it is to say, let's think about something that's easy for you to send compassion to. Who's someone in your life, even a pet or another creature or something that you can easily extend compassion to get even a sense of that feeling. I was sitting in a therapy session, not as a therapist, not as a client, but with a little girl that's close to me in my life. And she was talking to her therapist about how hard it was, how hard she was on her little self. She's only 10 and she's someone I love very dearly. And the therapist said to her, "Oh, it sounds like you're a really good friend and you give all kinds of love to your friend, but it's hard for you to give that same love to yourself." And she just started to cry. She said, "Yeah, it's really hard. And it's even hard for a little 10-year-old to do that. So I want to be really compassionate here and really make space for how difficult this can be, especially when you're going through something really, really difficult. But
Yeah.
that's why it's important." And I think that her therapist is planning, and I don't think this, I know that part of the package deal with them working together in therapy is to help this little girl find that self-love inside of herself and that she can extend that same love and grace that she gives to others to herself.
Mm.
And then there's the second type of self-compassion. It's called fierce self-compassion. And this is a self-compassion that's more about taking action. Maybe the job we're doing isn't right for us, and being kind to ourselves is to find another job. Maybe it means changing our circumstances in some way. Maybe it means setting healthier boundaries when people are mistreating us. That we need to take an action that's about kindness and self-care and self-love. That if something is not good for us, we do something about it because we care about ourselves and we value and extend ourselves that grace and self-compassion.
So, um, I think gentle sounds easy and fierce sounds scary.
Hmm. And by fierce, I
Like,
just mean with a lot of energy.
no, and I'm not saying
Mhm.
I'm not saying fierce like Gary. I just mean it feels like, oh, okay, if I probably need to be more fierce in my self compassion. Um, but it means I might have to I might have to not manage other people's feelings while I'm being compassionate to myself.
Hmm.
Do you
Hmm.
get what I'm saying?
I do.
Like if I have to set a healthy boundary to show myself self-compassion, I'm gonna disappoint some people who are expecting things of me.
Yeah, you might. That's a
Yeah.
boundary.
Yep.
That's setting a healthy boundary. And you know what needs to be in place before you can set healthy boundaries? A genuine sense of self-love and self-valuing and self-compassion. That's the mechanism that helps you set healthy boundaries. So I'm glad you said that. Okay, there's one other thing I want to talk about, and that is when self-compassion is real, we are actually opening up to the pain in our lives and responding with tenderness and kindness without any strings attached. And what I mean by that is without trying to force an outcome such as getting rid of the discomfort. That's a really important distinction because a lot of times people will misunderstand and think that extending your self-compassion is supposed to get rid of the
Healed you.
discomfort and
Yeah.
the challenge.
Hide it. It doesn't hide it.
Nope, it doesn't do that. In fact, it's just opening up to giving yourself grace as you're feeling pain and going through struggle. It's not, you're not doing it to get rid of the discomfort. So that's a really important thing because here we are talking about how we're tolerating discomfort for growth, and this helps us to tolerate, make more space for the pain. Okay. So, for instance, can we be compassionate to ourselves because we're depressed? Can we be compassionate to ourselves because we're anxious or because we're struggling? You know?
It's kind
So,
of like okay, so it was a Sunday and I had some responsibilities at church, and my child was not well. And I didn't realize when I was trying to set aside that child's needs until I was done with my responsibilities. That I didn't even realize that I was placing those responsibilities ahead of my child's needs until this child was in such a bad place that I thought, what am I doing? Like, why? Just because I'm not going to attend these meetings does not mean I don't care about those meetings, but it might mean that my child thinks I don't care about them. So I've got to not do that. I've got to, I've got to recognize that compassion like this is worth it. And for oneself, right? I'm using an example of compassion for someone else that we need to do for ourselves, to give ourselves permission to let go of some certain things, in order to be kinder to ourselves.
yeah, there's your fierce self-compassion.
Yep. Yeah,
Hmm.
the fierceness, that's why it came up. That's why I said that it causes fear, is because my hesitation was, I'm going to disappoint some people.
Yeah.
And the follow-up question was, what about me disappointing my son?
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
that's that's a priority. Other people can figure it out, right? My fierceness is going to be to my child in this moment.
Hmm.
And again, It doesn't mean that I'm not committed. It doesn't mean that that I'm not going to, fulfill my commitments that I've committed to. But yeah,
Yeah.
I hope that makes sense
Yeah. I'm a little off on I'm a little confused.
on what I just said.
Well, just because I was talking about, can we be compassionate to ourselves because we're having these difficult feelings, not to get rid of them, but because we're having them.
Yeah. So, um, yeah, I guess I'm confused too.
Yeah, I think we're off on a weird tangent there that doesn't
Okay,
make
say
sense.
that again though, because I'll track it. I promise I will.
Okay. So I'm saying like a lot of times we think we're extending the compassion to get rid of the pain, that it's going to make it go away. But really it helps us tolerate it, opens up more space to tolerate the pain. So can we be compassionate to ourselves because we're depressed, because we're anxious, because we're struggling, you know, but we don't,
Yes.
yes, yes. Does that,
Okay,
so,
so yeah, this is what it is. It's it's that when we recognize the reality of the pain that we're having, it helps us to set those priorities in place, right? So you have every right to have compassion. Your child is having this thing, right? You have every right to let go of those things. You're extending compassion in this moment because this is warranted. And in the self situation, we're not willing to say that
mm,
it's warranted.
yeah,
We have to be able
I
to say,
see.
hey, this is a serious thing. You are sad. You are depressed. You are angry in an unhealthy way. And so self compassion is warranted here. Let go of some of these other things.
I see what you're saying. Okay, that makes sense. You
Sorry.
tracked us there. That was
To,
good.
to all of our listeners, I am so sorry. My brain, it just goes really fast when Jill's saying some really good things. So
No, it makes sense. We just
I
needed to
hope you can
be
follow.
patient and get there. I
Well,
totally
and
understand what you're saying.
thanks for
Yes.
calling me out on it, Jill. I appreciate it.
Yes. So depending on the gravity of the situation, we don't necessarily extend the compassion because it will help us make change, although it can help us with that. And because we want to feel better, although it can help us with that. But because we feel bad, because we're uncomfortable,
Right.
we're extending that compassion. Yes, exactly. It's not about
Positive.
manipulating how we feel, because what
That's
we
right.
resist will persist, right? But if we can feel, we can heal. And so self-compassion opens up space for us to feel the full experience of humanity that can be painful. Yes, it's to open up more space and to tolerate it better. Yes, that's right. So we're not practicing self-compassion to be able to perfect ourselves, but to more tenderly embrace imperfection. Or in other words, to openly embrace and tolerate our humanity. That's what we're doing. Yes.
That's great.
Yes. Okay. So I just have a couple notes here. So I'm just thinking where to go from here. We've talked about shame. I have a lot of notes on that. Um, we talked about how people tend to be good at taking care of others. And that's true for people who've experienced a lot of trauma. Sometimes when people have experienced a lot of trauma, self-compassion can be really extra challenging for those people. They need it really badly, but it can be extra challenging for them to access that feeling and that ability to extend self-compassion to them. But ironically, they usually tend to be really good at extending compassion to others. And so that can be a way
Are there
to help them.
circumstances where they have a hard time extending it to themselves and to others because their pain is so bad?
Yes, that can be true. It can be so bad that compassion's not something they experience a lot of towards others or themselves. But in general, people who've experienced traumatic things, at least my experience, are pretty good at extending that compassion and grace to others, but they really struggle to give it to themselves. I have one client, for instance, who really struggles with this concept of self-compassion. It's really difficult for her She has these two dogs that she absolutely loves. And if they're in any kind of pain or discomfort, her compassion is overwhelming for them. But it's hard for her to, and when I talk a lot about how she feels towards her dogs to help her gently and little bit by little bit extend that circle of compassion to herself.
Can I make a faith parallel here?
Hmm.
So, when we think about how we view God or deity, and if we think that God or deity is so powerful that they've never experienced pain, or we see them as this like strong, tough person that's never had to, that they're God because they're so strong that they've never had pain. I think that we remove their capacity to have compassion for us.
Hmm. Hmm.
If we can see God as someone who has experienced pain, who is well acquainted with pain, as Isaiah has said, well acquainted with grief, then we also have a God who is filled with compassion for
Hmm.
each of us. And so I just when we have a tendency to see God as distant or stoic or um, old and this parent figure who is authoritative and expects high things that are impossible to achieve. I'm not saying he doesn't expect high things, but I'm saying he's compassionate about it.
Hmm.
And if we're talking about the Father, we're talking about the Father and the Son, either way, or our heavenly parents in general. They experience, they've somewhere in their history,
Their
they've experienced
evolution.
pain. Yep.
Mhm.
They've experienced pain. And so their compassion is there. And anyone who's experienced being a parent on this earth, like you're patient even with dogs, right? It doesn't you don't have to be a parent. But if you've had a stewardship for someone that you care about and love, and they're in pain, there's the there's the compassion because
Hmm.
you your own pain.
Well, I don't know about you, but that's the quality of how I understand and relate to Jesus Christ that's the most compelling and draws me to him the most is that his bowels are filled with mercy. They're filled with compassion because he's been where we've been. He's experienced what we've experienced. And so he knows how to give us, he knows how to succor us, he knows how to love us and give us compassion. And so that's what draws us to him. That's the powerful force, I think, for me at least that draws me towards him, not because he's a rule giver, but because he's
Right.
compassionate and filled with mercy. It's a
And,
powerful, powerful force in the world. That compassion is love, right? It's love filled. And when we can give that love to others and learn to extend it to ourselves, it can have a powerful impact on us as we go through and tolerate the discomfort of being human in this life that's full of challenge and won't ever not be. So
yeah.
it's a good thing to develop if you're trying to learn to tolerate that discomfort that's inherent in growing, giving yourself compassion and to expand that space where you can feel that pain and extend that love as you're feeling the pain. It won't take it away, but it will help you tolerate it.
And that's why,
Mm.
uh, as you mentioned, Jesus Christ, that's why he's the perfect one to have compassion because
Hmm.
he's experienced the depths of pain of which we can't even imagine.
Hmm.
So he knows the full spectrum of pain,
Yes.
and so he has the full spectrum of capacity for compassion.
And Eric, what's so difficult is sometimes when we can't make room for that compassion, we won't even go to God
Yep.
for those very same reasons that we won't extend that compassion to ourselves.
You know what? The
Mhm.
craziest mindset that I hear sometimes
Mhm.
is when we think if I'm more perfect, then I somehow retroactively remove the pain from Gethsemane and Golgotha.
Mhm.
It doesn't even you can't even do it. It's already happened. So they're trying to remove pain. And I just wish we'd realize, hey, that mindset, not only is it impossible, but you're trying to remove pain that brought about his bowels of compassion. That
Yeah.
pain that he willingly took so that he could um, so that he could extend compassion and love to
Hmm.
us.
Yeah. But this speaks to just how difficult this can be.
Yep, it's
Hmm.
complex.
It really can. And, this is just a little tiny comment, then we'll move on. But we need to be careful in church often how we're talking about things so that we don't give people the wrong idea about God,
Yeah,
right? That's really, we got to be careful because people are picking up that idea somewhere that
yep,
he's not going to extend grace and compassion when when we have weakness and we're making mistakes and we're struggling.
yeah.
Okay,
Well
I always
said.
want to talk about things that are really concrete. So some things you can think about um, around self-compassion. Here's some questions you can ask yourself in the arena of tender self-compassion. Okay, remember there's two types. This is that tender self-compassion. You can ask yourselves when you're going through struggle and discomfort and you're trying to tolerate it, you can ask yourself, what would be comforting right now? What could I tell myself? What can I go do that would be comforting to me right now? Another question you can ask yourself, what would be soothing?
So is that is that type of question, does that lead to maladaptive behaviors? If we
Well,
have a tendency to think that that
it
does
could,
that?
but we're talking about kind, tender self-compassion. We're not
Okay.
talking about avoidance by, going and having a cart of eat some ice cream. Not that
Or
eating some
rolling a
ice cream would be bad, but it's not about like compulsive behaviors to avoid a feeling. This is about extending ourselves some love.
okay.
Another one would be what would be validating? What do I need to hear? What would be nice to hear from somebody else? What can I say it to myself? Mm-hmm. So some other ideas. Soothing touch. There was a study done at Berkeley that just 20 seconds of soothing touch decreases stress and increases self-compassion. And so I like to kind of figure out where in my body am I feeling this distress and touch it and just soothingly touch it. It can actually soothe you and reduce the stress and help you feel those feelings of compassion when you find that part in your body where you're feeling that distress and you soothe it with some touch. Um, Again, oh, I already said that one. Maybe, something, for instance, like I've had a really hard day. Maybe I need a little bit of a warm bath or just something that would be comforting. Go put on a comfortable robe. I like to put my robe in the dryer and then put it on and it just, oh yeah. See, it's okay, Jill. It's been a tough day. Um, some other things. We talk a lot about awareness and acceptance on this podcast. Expand that. Something that can help us with self-compassion is being more aware in the present moment. Um, and what else did I put here? Oh, yes. This is hard. And I think this we can kind of pointing to this, but think of equanimity. Can you be present with something that you're experiencing without judgment or condemnation? Maybe just try and take away the judgment and the condemnation and see what arises, if you can.
And is that hard because it kind of goes back to the notion of um, this will, I'll feel entitled to bad behavior.
Mhm. But we know now, we've discussed this a few times. We know now that that might be instinctual thinking, but it's actually faulty because research has shown us that the opposite is true. So when we remove a lot of judgment and condemnation, I mean harsh judgment. I don't mean wise judgment, meaning like, oh, this might not be accruing to my benefit. Maybe I should change this. That's a kind, carefully considered higher self judgment that can help us move towards better. But I'm talking about harsh self-judgment in a condemning, harsh, mean-spirited way
Mhm.
that we can sometimes do to others and to ourselves.
Yeah.
If we can remove that energy as much as possible, I wonder what would arise there.
Well, we must need to learn it because we keep bringing it up,
I know
right?
it's true.
It is
It's
such a
true.
tendency of ours.
It's such a tendency of ours. Okay, so that's our discussion on self-compassion. Luckily, a lot of good work in the field of psychology has been done around compassion and in faith. So, there's a lot of resources I'm sure you could give, probably endless. But there
Endless.
are some psychology good resources. The guru of all gurus in self-compassion is a woman named Kristen Neff. And she has written some really beautiful books. And two that I love it's just called Self-Compassion by Kristen Neff. I highly recommend that. And then she's written a book called Fierce Self-Compassion. So she's kind of addressed those two types of self-compassion. And I highly recommend those resources. I think everyone should read those. That's how important this is. So I would highly recommend those resources. And then another person who I love in the psychology field that talks about self-compassion is a woman named Tara Brach. And Tara Brach wrote a book called Radical Compassion. And it's beautiful. And then she does some beautiful self-compassion meditations that you can find on YouTube. And if you really want to do a meditation that helps you connect with that feeling and experience and quality of self-compassion, go do some of Tara Brach's mindfulness meditations around compassion. They're really powerful, really powerful.
Every time you list the sources that you get your stuff, I think, does she ever not read? And what I think is
No,
so great, Jill, is that goes back to what we said in the last podcast, curiosity.
yeah.
Curiosity drives education, education and curiosity drive compassion.
Hmm.
And that's when we can help people.
Yep.
So thank you for paying a price and doing the digging so that you can teach us and help us know how to implement these strategies in our lives for a healthier way of living.
Well,
So,
luckily for me, it's not hard because this stuff is where my passion is and what really interests me and lights my fire. So I love learning about this, and I hope that we're helping other people get excited about learning about these things because it all contributes to better well-being, and that's what we're after, is
yeah.
better well-being, higher levels of self-development and deeper levels of connection in our lives with ourselves and with other people, because that's where well-being really lies. And so hopefully our explorations of this, as maybe like clunky and imperfect as they are, can help people just think about it. Just think about these concepts.
Hey, I personally think the clunkiness is good because
Good.
the clunkiness helps us to
Sort it
really
out.
be together.
Yeah.
Yep.
Just sort it out together because these are
Yep.
not easy concepts to talk about. And we're not doing it perfectly, but that's not the point. We're just
That's
hopefully stoking your fire and making you want to be more curious about it and learn more about it to benefit your life.
that's what I love. I think it's
Yep.
great.
I love talking about this stuff with you, Eric, and I appreciate
Yeah.
it. Even when I don't understand you, but like I'm old and my brain, sometimes I have to go, say that again, say that
Well,
again.
I'm just as old because I have to ask you to remind me where you thought I was going with it. So
That's
it's
right.
really
But you
good.
know what? We're going to extend self-compassion and grace
That's
to
right.
our, age and the
And the
things that
more we
come
do
with
this,
us.
the more we'll track with each other. It'll be
That's
great.
true. That's true. Okay, sounds good.
Hey,
Well,
thank you,
next time we're
Jill.
going to,
Thank you to our listeners. It's great. Yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
thanks,
Next
listeners.
time,
Yeah. Next
values,
time we'll
right?
talk about values. That's where we're going to go next time.
Okay.
Okay,
Sounds good.
sounds good. All right, we'll
Thanks,
see you.
Jill. Bye.
Bye-bye.